The ice hit Minneapolis like a sledgehammer on a Tuesday morning, and I was in my heated garage working on a 1967 Mustang when someone started pounding on the door hard enough to rattle the frame. I wiped the grease off my hands and pressed the button to raise the door, expecting maybe my neighbor Jim, who sometimes needed to borrow tools. Instead, I found myself face to face with Brenda Sullivan, the HOA president of Riverside Meadows, and she looked absolutely furious despite the fact that ice was literally forming on her blonde, highlighted hair. "You need to open this garage immediately for community use," she announced, not asked, announced. Her voice had that sharp quality that made my teeth hurt. "The power is out across half the neighborhood, and you have the only heated space available. I've already made a list of priority residents who will be rotating through." I blinked at her, still holding my greasy rag. "Excuse me. Don't be difficult, Daniel. This is an emergency situation, and according to HOA Bylaws Section 12.7, all community resources must be made available during natural disasters." She held up a laminated binder that she apparently carried around even in an ice storm. The woman was dedicated. I would give her that. "Brenda, this is my private garage. It is not a community resource." I tried to keep my voice level, but the temperature outside was hovering around 15 degrees, and she was letting all my heat out. "Actually," she said, stepping forward in a way that forced me to either let her in or physically block her, "the HOA has the authority to commandeer private spaces during emergencies. I have already contacted the other board members and we have voted. You voted to take my garage." I could not believe what I was hearing. I had dealt with some HOA nonsense before, but this was a new level of absurd. Not take, utilize. There is a difference. She was already inside now, looking around at my workspace with obvious disapproval. "This is quite excessive for one person anyway. You have what, 800 square feet here? That could accommodate at least 20 people comfortably." 20 people. This is where I work. I have expensive tools, an ongoing restoration project, and I am not running a shelter. I moved to block her path further into the garage where the Mustang sat partially disassembled. Brenda pulled out her phone, scrolling through something with her manicured nails clicking against the screen. "I am documenting your refusal to comply with HOA regulations. This will result in fines, and if you continue to obstruct emergency operations, we can pursue legal action to have you removed from the community." "Removed from my own home," I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Brenda, you need to leave. Now. If you want to set up a shelter, I suggest you use the community center that we all pay fees to maintain. The community center does not have heat or backup power. You do. I can see the generators from here." She pointed at my 2 industrial generators sitting against the far wall. "Those are exactly what we need. Those are mine. I bought them, I maintain them, and I am using them." I walked to the door controls. "You have 5 seconds to leave before I close this door, and we can discuss whatever imaginary bylaws you think exist at a time when we are not hemorrhaging heat." Her face turned an impressive shade of red. "You are making a terrible mistake. I have authority in this neighborhood and people will hear about this. You will be ostracized. Your property values will tank when I am done." "Goodbye, Brenda." I hit the button and the door began to lower. She scurried out at the last second, still yelling threats that were mostly drowned out by the motor. When the door sealed shut, I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. The audacity of showing up at someone's home and demanding access to their private property was staggering, even for an HOA president. My phone rang almost immediately. I did not recognize the number but answered anyway. "Daniel Lawson. This is Patricia Chen from the HOA board." I need to inform you that you have been issued a violation notice for failure to comply with emergency protocols. The fine is $500, and it will increase by $100 per day until you comply. Patricia, is this a joke? I walked back to my workbench, phone pressed against my ear. I am very serious, Mr. Lawson. The HOA board met via emergency conference call 10 minutes ago, and we voted 4-1 to implement emergency measures. Your property has been designated as an emergency warming center, and your refusal to cooperate is endangering lives. My property is my property. You cannot just declare it a public space because the power went out. That is not how property rights work. I was trying very hard not to yell. Our attorneys disagree. You will be receiving formal documentation within the hour. I suggest you reconsider your position before this escalates. She hung up. I stood there in my garage, listening to the wind howl outside and the steady hum of my generators. This was insane. I had lived in Riverside Meadows for 5 years, kept my head down, paid my HOA dues on time, and never caused problems. Now suddenly, I was public enemy number 1 because I would not turn my workspace into a homeless shelter. My actual phone, my personal cell, started buzzing with texts. I checked and found I had been added to some kind of neighborhood group chat. The messages were brutal. Can you believe Daniel Lawson refused to help during the ice storm? Some people are so selfish. My grandmother is freezing, but he cares more about his car. The HOA should force him to open up. We pay dues for times like this. I always knew that guy was weird, never comes to community events. I scrolled through dozens of similar messages, watching my reputation get shredded in real time by people I had never even spoken to. The thing was, most of these people did not live anywhere near me. The power outage was affecting maybe 30 homes out of the 200 in the development, and most of those people had either left to stay with family or were managing fine with fireplaces and blankets. This was not about helping people. This was about Brenda asserting control. Another knock on the door, this time more polite. I opened it to find Jim, my actual neighbor, standing there with his hands shoved in his pockets. Hey man, crazy morning, huh? He looked uncomfortable. You could say that. I gestured him inside quickly before too much cold air got in. Jim glanced around the garage, at the Mustang, at my tool chests, at the space heater running in the corner. Look, I am just going to be straight with you. Brenda is going house to house telling everyone you are hoarding resources and refusing to help the community. She has got people worked up. Worked up about what? My private garage that I pay to heat with my own generators using my own fuel. I could hear my voice rising. I know. It is ridiculous. Sarah and I think the whole thing is crazy, but Brenda has a lot of influence, and she is really pushing this narrative that you are some kind of villain. Jim ran a hand through his hair. I just wanted to give you a heads up. She is talking about organizing some kind of protest or something. A protest. In an ice storm. This day kept getting more surreal. I am just telling you what I heard. Also, and this is probably nothing, but I saw her taking pictures of your property from the street earlier. Your fence, your garage, your driveway, I do not know what that is about. Jim looked genuinely concerned now. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. She was documenting something, probably to build some kind of case. Yeah, maybe. Anyway, I need to get back. Sarah is freaking out about the pipes freezing. I just wanted to warn you. Jim headed for the door, then paused. Hey, any chance I could borrow your pipe heater? I will bring it back tomorrow. Sure, let me grab it. I found the heat tape in my storage cabinet and handed it over. You need help installing it? No, I should be good. Thanks, man. And seriously, watch your back with Brenda. She gets fixated on things. Jim left quickly and I sealed the door behind him. I returned to working on the Mustang, trying to focus on the carburetor rebuild I had been in the middle of, but my mind kept wandering. The HOA had always been a minor annoyance before, sending snippy letters about trash can placement or lawn height, but this was different. This felt personal and targeted. Around noon, my phone rang again. This time it was my property manager, Marcus Green. "Daniel, we have a situation," he said without preamble. "If this is about the HOA thing, I already know." I set down my wrench and leaned against the workbench. "It is bigger than you think. I just got a call from Brenda Sullivan. She is demanding I intervene as your property manager to force you to comply with the emergency measures." Marcus sounded tired. "You are not my property manager, Marcus. You are the property manager for my rental properties." I felt my stomach drop as I realized where this was going. Right. About that. She kept insisting she needed to speak to the property owner about forcing compliance, and I kept trying to explain that you own your property outright. Then she started talking about all these other properties in the development. "And Daniel, I think she might be living in one of your rentals." I pulled up the property management app on my phone, scrolling through my listings. I owned 6 rental properties in Riverside Meadows, investment properties I had bought over the years as the market allowed. 3 single-family homes and 3 townhouses, all professionally managed by Marcus's company. "Which property?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. "The townhouse at 847 Riverside Drive. Lease is under Brenda Sullivan, been there for 18 months. Marcus clicked some keys on his end. "She has been a model tenant, actually. Pays on time, no complaints, no maintenance issues." I pulled up the full file on my computer. Sure enough, there was Brenda's name on a lease agreement I had never personally reviewed because Marcus handled all the tenant interactions. Monthly rent was $2,800, which was market rate for the area. Security deposit, renter's insurance, everything was in order. "Does she know I am the owner?" I asked. "The property is held under your LLC, Lawson Holdings, so it depends on whether she has ever looked up the corporate registration. Most tenants do not." Marcus paused. "Are you thinking what I think you are thinking?" "I am thinking that my tenant is trying to commandeer my personal property while simultaneously threatening to fine me and sue me." I was already pulling up the lease agreement, reading through the terms carefully. "Yeah, that is a problem. What do you want me to do?" "Nothing yet. Let me think about this. But Marcus, do me a favor and pull up her payment history. I want to see everything." I put him on speaker while I navigated through the files. We spent the next 20 minutes going through Brenda's entire tenancy. She had been absolutely perfect on paper. Never a late payment, never a complaint from neighbors, never a maintenance request that was not legitimate. She was the kind of tenant landlords dreamed about. "There is one thing," Marcus said slowly. "About 6 months ago, she requested permission to run an HOA office out of the townhouse. We approved it since it is not a business that generates traffic, just paperwork and phone calls. That is kosher under the lease terms for home office use. So she is running HOA business out of my property," I said, "including her current campaign to seize my garage." "When you put it that way, it sounds really problematic." Marcus let out a long breath. "Look, I am not going to tell you how to handle your properties, but if you are considering any kind of action, we need to be very careful about retaliation laws. Just because she is causing problems does not mean we can violate the lease terms or tenant rights. I know. I am not going to do anything illegal or unethical, but I am also not going to sit here and be threatened by someone who is literally paying me rent." I closed my laptop. "For now, do not tell her anything. Let me handle this my way." After I hung up with Marcus, I did something I should have probably done earlier. I actually read the HOA bylaws, all 73 pages of them. I had skimmed them when I bought the house, but like most people, I had not committed them to memory. The emergency powers section that Brenda had referenced was real, sort of. Section 12.7 did allow the HOA to coordinate emergency response efforts and request voluntary cooperation from residents in providing aid and assistance during natural disasters or community emergencies. Request. Voluntary. Those were the key words she had conveniently ignored. There was absolutely nothing in the bylaws that gave the HOA authority to commandeer private property, seize personal equipment, or force residents to open their homes. It was all voluntary cooperation, and even then, it mostly dealt with things like allowing emergency vehicles through private streets or coordinating with local authorities. Brenda had completely fabricated the authority she claimed to have. I took screenshots of the relevant sections and forwarded them to my phone. Then, I looked up the actual Minnesota laws regarding HOA authority. It turned out that HOAs were really limited in what they could actually do. They could enforce reasonable restrictions on external property appearance. They could maintain common areas, and they could collect dues. They could not seize property. They could not impose fines without proper notice and appeals processes, and they definitely could not force entry into private spaces. Armed with this information, I drafted a careful email to the HOA board, copying all 5 members. To the Riverside Meadows HOA board, I am writing in response to the demands made this morning by President Brenda Sullivan regarding my private garage and personal property. After careful review of the HOA bylaws and Minnesota state law, I must inform you that the actions threatened and the fines levied are not supported by any legal authority. Section 12.7 of our bylaws requests voluntary cooperation during emergencies. It does not grant authority to commandeer private property or equipment. Any fines issued on this basis are illegitimate and will be contested. I am willing to assist my neighbors in reasonable ways during this weather emergency, but I will not have my property rights violated or be threatened with legal action for exercising those rights. I request that all threatened fines be immediately rescinded and that no further harassment regarding this matter occur. If the board wishes to discuss legitimate ways to handle future emergencies, I am open to that conversation when the current crisis has passed. Daniel Lawson, 847 Riverside Lane. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response was almost immediate. 3 board members replied within minutes, all saying some variation of "we were not aware of the extent of demands being made, and this will be discussed at the next board meeting." The 4th member, Patricia Chen, who had called earlier, sent a terse, "Your objections are noted." Brenda did not respond at all. I made myself lunch, a simple sandwich, and tried to go back to work on the Mustang. The ice storm showed no signs of letting up outside. The wind was howling, and I could hear tree branches cracking under the weight of ice. This was the kind of weather that would keep people inside for days, which meant Brenda had plenty of time to stew and plan whatever revenge she thought appropriate. Around 3 in the afternoon, there was another knock. I was getting really tired of interruptions, but when I checked the security camera I had mounted outside, I saw it was Marcus. I let him in quickly. He was bundled up like an Arctic explorer and covered in ice. "Why are you here?" I asked, genuinely confused. Marcus usually handled everything remotely, because Brenda Sullivan just showed up at my office demanding I evict you from your own property. He stomped his feet to shake off the ice. "Daniel, She has completely lost it. She spent 20 minutes yelling about how you are a danger to the community and how, as the property management company, we have a responsibility to remove problem tenants. Except I am not a tenant, I am the owner. I grabbed him a towel for his face. Right, which I explained multiple times. She did not seem to hear me. She kept insisting there had to be some kind of corporate owner she could appeal to, someone above you who would see reason. Marcus looked around the garage, taking in the setup. Nice space, by the way. Is that a '67 Mustang? Yeah, fastback. But focus, Marcus. What did you tell her? I told her that you own the property free and clear, that I manage your rental properties but have no authority over your residents, and that she needed to leave my office. She threatened to sue us for obstruction. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me a video. I started recording when she would not leave. Watch this. The video showed Brenda in Marcus's office, red-faced and gesturing wildly. Her voice came through tinny but clear. You are protecting a criminal. He is hoarding resources during an emergency. People could die because of his selfishness, and you are helping him. Her voice was shrill, almost hysterical. Marcus's voice, calm and professional. Miss Sullivan, I understand you are upset, but Mr. Lawson is not breaking any laws. He is under no obligation to open his private property. The HOA has authority. I have the votes. I have the documentation. She was waving papers around. The HOA does not supersede property rights or state law. Now I am going to have to ask you to leave. This is private property and you are disturbing my other clients. The video ended with Brenda storming out, still yelling threats. She is going to be a problem, I said, handing the phone back. Already is. But here is the thing I came to tell you in person. When I was escorting her out, she got a phone call. I did not mean to eavesdrop, but she was yelling loud enough that everyone could hear. She was talking to someone about organizing a community intervention at your property tomorrow morning. Marcus looked genuinely worried. She said something about making sure you understand that the community comes first. A community intervention. What does that even mean? I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I do not know, but it sounded like she is planning to bring people to your house. Maybe to protest, maybe to try to force their way in. I could not tell. Marcus shook his head. I know this is not my business, but you might want to call the police non-emergency line and give them a heads up. If a bunch of people show up on your property making demands, things could get out of hand fast. He was right. I thanked Marcus and saw him out, then called the Minneapolis police non-emergency number. The dispatcher sounded bored until I explained the situation. So your HOA president is threatening to bring a group to your property to force you to open your garage. The dispatcher's tone changed. Sir, that could be trespassing and potentially criminal threatening. Do you feel you are in immediate danger? Not right now, but I am concerned about tomorrow. I gave her all the details I had. I am making a report now. An officer will probably swing by tonight or tomorrow morning to talk to you. In the meantime, if anyone shows up and refuses to leave when you tell them to, that is trespassing. Call 911 immediately if that happens. She took down all my information and promised someone would follow up. I spent the rest of the afternoon reinforcing my position. I checked all my security cameras, made sure they were recording, and added 2 more to cover angles I had not worried about before. I documented everything in a timeline. Brenda's visit, the phone calls, the threats, the group chat messages, all of it. I took screenshots and backed everything up to cloud storage. If this was going to turn into a legal battle, I was going to be prepared. That evening, a Minneapolis police officer named Rodriguez came by. He was young but professional, and he took my report seriously. HOA disputes can get really ugly, he said. sitting in his patrol car in my driveway with me in the passenger seat to escape the cold. I have seen them escalate fast. The problem is, most of the time it is civil stuff that we cannot touch. But if they are planning to trespass or attempt to force entry, that is criminal. I just want to be left alone to work on my car in my garage, I said. It sounded absurd when I said it out loud. I get it. Here is what I recommend. Tomorrow, if people show up, you tell them once to leave. Just once, clearly, so your cameras pick it up. If they refuse, you call 911 immediately. Do not engage, do not argue, do not try to physically remove anyone. Let us handle it. Rodriguez handed me his card. If you have any concerns before tomorrow, call the non-emergency line and ask for me specifically. I will be on duty. After he left, I tried to relax, but sleep did not come easy that night. I kept thinking about Brenda's face when she was in my garage, that entitled certainty that she had the right to take what was mine. I thought about the people in the group chat who had never met me but were ready to believe the worst. I thought about how quickly things had spiraled from a simple no to threats of legal action and organized harassment. The next morning, I woke up at 6 to the sound of voices outside. I checked my security cameras and felt my blood pressure spike. There were about 15 people gathered on the sidewalk in front of my house, and Brenda was at the center holding a megaphone. I got dressed quickly and checked the cameras again. The group had grown to maybe 20 people now, and someone had brought a sign that read, "Community over selfishness." Another sign said, "Heat is a right." I called 911. 911, what is your emergency? This is Daniel Lawson at 847 Riverside Lane. I have a group of approximately 20 people on my property refusing to leave. I informed the police yesterday this might happen. Officer Rodriguez took my report. I kept my voice calm and factual. Units are being dispatched now. Are you in immediate danger? I am inside my home. They are outside but on my property, not the sidewalk. One person has a megaphone and is making demands. I watched the cameras as Brenda started walking up my driveway. Stay inside and keep your doors locked. Officers are 3 minutes away. I stayed on the line and watched the cameras. Brenda reached my front door and started pounding on it with her fist, the megaphone in her other hand making horrible feedback noises. Daniel Lawson, you need to come out here and face your neighbors. You cannot hide while people are suffering. Her voice was distorted by the megaphone but clear enough. I did not respond. I just kept watching and recording. The police arrived fast, 3 cars with lights flashing. The crowd immediately started backing toward the sidewalk, but Brenda held her ground on my porch. I watched as Rodriguez approached her, speaking calmly. I could not hear what he was saying, but I could see Brenda gesturing wildly, pointing at my garage, at the house, at the crowd behind her. Rodriguez kept his body language neutral but firm. After a few minutes, my phone rang. It was Rodriguez. "Mr. Lawson, can you come out here, please? I want you to formally tell Miss Sullivan to leave your property so we have it on record." His voice was professional. I went outside, staying in my doorway. The cold hit me immediately, and I could see my breath. Brenda was still on my porch, but Rodriguez was between us now. "Miss Sullivan, I am asking you to leave my property immediately. You do not have permission to be here." I said it clearly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You cannot kick me out. I have every right to be here. The community needs access to your garage." Brenda was still clutching her megaphone like a weapon. Rodriguez stepped closer to her. "Madam, you have been asked to leave private property by the owner. If you refuse, I will have to arrest you for trespassing. I need you to step off the porch and return to the public sidewalk now. This is ridiculous. He is the one breaking the law. He is violating HOA bylaws and endangering people." but she was moving, backing down the porch steps. HOA bylaws are a civil matter, madam. Trespassing is criminal. Please return to the sidewalk. Rodriguez kept himself between Brenda and me. The crowd was watching, phones out, recording everything. I could see some people looking uncomfortable, like maybe they were realizing this had gone too far. Others looked angry, like they believed every word Brenda had told them. Brenda finally retreated to the sidewalk, but she raised the megaphone again. This is not over. The HOA board has authorized legal action. You will pay for every day you refuse to cooperate. Rodriguez turned to me. Mr. Lawson, are you willing to press charges for trespassing? I looked at Brenda, at the angry crowd, at the whole insane situation. Part of me wanted to say yes, to make her face consequences for this harassment, but I also knew that would just escalate things further. Not at this time. I just want everyone to leave. I said it loud enough for the crowd to hear. Fair enough. Folks, Rodriguez raised his voice, addressing the crowd, you are welcome to protest on the public sidewalk, but any person who steps onto private property without permission will be arrested. Am I clear? There were murmurs of agreement. Some people were already drifting away, the excitement wearing off now that police were involved. But a core group of about 10 people stayed, huddled around Brenda. I went back inside and watched the cameras. The group stayed for another hour, holding their signs and occasionally chanting things like "Community First" and "Open your garage." Eventually, the cold won out and they dispersed, but Brenda stayed until the very end, glaring at my house like she could set it on fire with her eyes. Rodriguez knocked on my door again before he left. That could have gone worse. But Mr. Lawson, I am going to be honest with you. This lady seems pretty unhinged. You might want to consider getting a restraining order. Can I do that? I had never dealt with anything like this before. You can file for a harassment restraining order. Given the documented threats and the fact that she showed up with a group to harass you, you might have a case. I would talk to a lawyer. He handed me another card, this one for a legal aid service. They can point you in the right direction. After the police left, I sat in my garage trying to process everything. 24 hours ago, I had been peacefully rebuilding a carburetor. Now I had an angry mob showing up at my house and a police report filed. All because I would not let the HOA take my property. My phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. Mr. Lawson, this is Jennifer Kim from Channel 7 News. We heard about the incident at your home this morning. Would you be willing to comment on the HOA dispute? The reporter sounded eager. How did you hear about that? I asked carefully. Someone from the protest posted videos on social media. It is getting a lot of attention. The story of an HOA demanding access to private property during a weather emergency is pretty compelling. I could hear her typing. We would love to get your side of things. I thought about it for a second. Part of me wanted to hide, to wait for this to blow over. But Brenda was already controlling the narrative, painting me as the villain. Maybe it was time to tell my story. What do you need from me? I asked. An hour later, a news crew was set up in my driveway. Jennifer Kim was professional and sympathetic as she interviewed me, asking about the demands Brenda had made, the threats I had received, and the protests that morning. So to be clear, Jennifer said, looking directly at the camera, the HOA demanded you open your private garage and provide your personal generators for community use, and when you refused, they issued fines and organized a protest at your home. That is correct. I am willing to help my neighbors in reasonable ways, but I am not willing to have my property rights violated or be threatened for saying no. I had practiced that line in my head before the interview. Have you had any response from the HOA board about these actions? 3 of the 5 board members have indicated they were not aware of the extent of the demands being made. The president, Brenda Sullivan, has not responded to my concerns. I tried to keep my voice neutral, factual. The interview aired that evening on the 6 o'clock news. I watched it on my phone, sitting in my garage with the Mustang, and felt a weird sense of surrealism seeing my own face on television. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started buzzing with texts and calls from people I had not spoken to in years. Old college friends, former co-workers, distant relatives, all weighing in on the situation. The news station's website crashed from traffic, according to Jennifer Kim, who sent me a message saying the story was blowing up. More importantly, I started getting messages from other people in Riverside Meadows, people I had never met who lived on the other side of the development. I had no idea Brenda told you the board voted on this. We never voted on anything. Thank you for speaking out. She has been abusing her authority for years. I was at the protest this morning because Brenda said you were hoarding supplies. I am sorry. I should have asked questions first. It turned out I was not the only person Brenda had targeted. Over the next few hours, I got messages from residents detailing years of harassment, excessive fines for minor violations, threats of legal action over Christmas decorations, demands to access people's backyards to inspect for violations. One person said Brenda had tried to fine them for having the wrong color mailbox, even though their mailbox was the original one installed by the builder. The HOA board apparently was hearing the same stories because I got an email from the vice president, Robert Martinez, asking if I could attend an emergency board meeting the next evening. That night, I barely slept again, but this time it was because I was compiling evidence. Every email, every text, every social media post, all of it organized into a clean timeline. If I was going to this meeting, I was going fully prepared. The next morning, I got a call from Marcus. "Daniel, we need to talk about Brenda Sullivan's lease." He sounded stressed. "What about it?" "She stopped payment on her February rent. The check bounced, and when I called her, she said she is withholding rent until you comply with HOA emergency measures." Marcus let out a frustrated breath. "She is claiming constructive eviction, saying that your refusal to provide community resources makes the property uninhabitable." I almost laughed. That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. My garage has nothing to do with her townhouse. I know, but she is trying to manufacture a legal justification for not paying. I have already sent her the required notices for non-payment. If she does not pay within the statutory period, we will start eviction proceedings. Marcus paused. "But Daniel, you need to be prepared for her to claim retaliation. The timing is really bad." "I am not retaliating. She stopped paying rent. That is on her, not me." But I knew he was right to be concerned. A judge might see a tenant in an HOA dispute with her landlord and assume the worst. "Just be careful. Document everything. Keep all communications professional, and do not make any decisions about her lease without running them by me first." Marcus hung up, and I was left staring at my phone. This was getting more complicated by the hour. The emergency HOA board meeting was held at the community center, which had power restored by then. I arrived early and found the parking lot already half full. Apparently word had gotten out, and people wanted to see what would happen. Inside, the meeting room was set up with a table for the board members and rows of chairs for residents. I took a seat near the back and waited. Brenda arrived last, sweeping in with her laminated binder and a lawyer in tow. The lawyer was a sharp-looking woman in her 40s, who immediately started setting up a laptop and papers at the table. Robert Martinez, the vice president, called the meeting to order. He looked uncomfortable, his tie slightly crooked and his forehead shiny with sweat. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. This emergency meeting has been called to address concerns about actions taken by board members during the recent ice storm, specifically regarding demands made on resident Daniel Lawson." Robert glanced at me, then at Brenda. "President Sullivan, would you like to make a statement?" Brenda stood, her lawyer right beside her. "I would. Everything I did was within the scope of my authority as HOA president. During an emergency, the board has broad powers to coordinate resources and ensure the safety of all residents. Mr. Lawson's refusal to cooperate endangered lives and violated the spirit of community that this neighborhood was built on." There were murmurs from the crowd, some agreeing, some clearly disagreeing. "I have documentation from our legal counsel," Brenda continued, gesturing to her lawyer, "confirming that the HOA can compel cooperation during emergencies. Mr. Lawson's subsequent media campaign to paint himself as a victim is nothing more than an attempt to avoid accountability." The lawyer stood up. "If I may, I am Christine Porter, and I represent the HOA in legal matters. While I was not consulted before the demands were made on Mr. Lawson, I have reviewed the bylaws and relevant Minnesota statutes. The HOA does have emergency powers, but they are limited to voluntary coordination and cooperation with local authorities. There is no provision for commandeering private property or equipment." Brenda turned to stare at her lawyer. "But you said we had authority." "I said the HOA has limited emergency powers. I did not say you could seize someone's garage." Christine looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Miss Sullivan, I advised you to contact the City Emergency Management Office and coordinate through official channels, not to make demands on individual residents. That would have taken too long. People needed help immediately." Brenda's voice was rising. Robert held up a hand. "President Sullivan, please sit down. Mr. Lawson, would you like to respond?" I stood up, my folder of evidence in hand. "Yes, thank you. I want to be clear about a few things. First, I was never opposed to helping my neighbors. I was opposed to being threatened and having my property rights violated. Second, no emergency vote was taken by the board. I have confirmed this with 3 board members who had no idea demands were being made in the board's name. Third, the protest organized at my home crossed the line into harassment and required police intervention." I held up my phone, showing screenshots. "I have documentation of everything. The threats, the fines issued without proper procedure, the group chat messages encouraging harassment, all of it. I am not the villain here. I am someone who said no and was punished for it." The room erupted in noise. People were talking over each other, some shouting support, some shouting disagreement. Robert had to bang a gavel 3 times to restore order. "Order! Everyone please calm down." Robert looked at Brenda. "President Sullivan, did you issue fines without a board vote?" Brenda crossed her arms. "I issued fines for violation of emergency protocols. That is within my authority." "No, it is not," said Patricia Chen, one of the other board members. "All fines require a majority vote. That is in the bylaws you love to quote. This was an emergency. We did not have time for votes." Brenda was standing again, her face red. "The emergency was a power outage, not an invasion," Patricia shot back. "You overstepped badly, and now we are all exposed to liability because you did not follow procedures." Christine, the lawyer, cleared her throat. "If I may, the HOA could potentially face a lawsuit from Mr. Lawson for harassment and violation of his property rights. The fines issued were not legitimate, and the protest could be construed as organized intimidation." Everyone turned to look at me. I had not actually threatened to sue, but now that the lawyer had brought it up, it was on the table. "I do not want to sue anyone," I said carefully. "I want the illegitimate fines rescinded. I want assurance that this will not happen again, and I want an acknowledgement that what happened was wrong. That is all." Robert nodded slowly. "That seems reasonable. I move that we rescind all fines issued to Mr. Lawson related to this matter." "Do I have a second?" 3 hands went up immediately. Patricia, another board member named George, and the 5th member whose name I could not remember. "All in favor." Robert called for the vote. 4 hands, everyone except Brenda. Motion passes. "Mr. Lawson, your fines are officially rescinded, and I personally apologize for what happened." Robert made a note on his papers. "Now, the matter of President Sullivan's conduct. I am calling for a vote of no confidence." Brenda shot to her feet. "You cannot do that." "Actually, I can. Any board member can call for a vote of no confidence if they believe another member is not fulfilling their duties appropriately. It requires a majority vote to remove a board member from their position." Robert looked around the table. "All in favor of removing Brenda Sullivan as HOA president and from the board." 4 hands went up. Brenda stared at them in shock. "You cannot do this. I have done everything for this community. I have given years of my life to making this neighborhood better." She was yelling now, her voice cracking. "You abused your authority and exposed the HOA to legal liability. The vote is 4-0 in favor of removal. Miss Sullivan, you are no longer HOA president or a board member. Please surrender any HOA property you have, including keys, documents, and the community email passwords." Robert was speaking formally, like he had practiced this. Brenda looked around the room at the faces of people she had governed for years. Some looked satisfied. Some looked uncomfortable. A few looked sympathetic, but no one came to her defense. "This is not over," she said finally, grabbing her things. "I will sue. I will expose all of you for conspiracy and targeted harassment. You have not heard the last of me." She stormed out, her lawyer following behind with an apologetic look at the board. The meeting continued for another hour, dealing with other business, but I barely paid attention. I was too busy processing what had just happened. Brenda had gone from HOA president to removed from the board in less than 24 hours from when I learned I was her landlord. After the meeting, several board members came up to apologize personally. Robert shook my hand and said, "We should have reined her in years ago. She meant well at first, but the power went to her head. I am sorry you had to be the one to finally stand up to her." I drove home feeling lighter than I had in days. The fines were gone, Brenda was off the board, and maybe things could finally get back to normal. But when I pulled into my driveway, I found Marcus waiting for me, and his expression told me things were not over yet. "We have a big problem," Marcus said as I got out of my car. "Brenda did not just stop payment on her rent. She has completely trashed the townhouse." My stomach dropped. "How bad?" "Bad. The neighbors called me because they heard crashing sounds and breaking glass. I went over there with the police to do a welfare check. Daniel, she has destroyed the place. Holes punched in walls, kitchen cabinets ripped off. She even took a hammer to the bathroom tiles. It is going to cost thousands to repair." I followed Marcus to the townhouse, which was only 3 blocks from my house. Police cars were still there, lights flashing. An officer I did not recognize was standing outside taking notes. "Are you the property owner?" the officer asked when I approached. "Yes, Daniel Lawson. This is my property manager, Marcus Green." I showed him my ID. "You are going to want to see this." The officer led me inside. The damage was worse than I had imagined. The living room walls had multiple fist-sized holes. The kitchen cabinets were hanging off the walls, doors broken. In the bathroom, tiles were shattered, and someone had spray-painted "Tyrant" across the mirror in red paint. The bedroom doors were off their hinges, and the carpet was stained with what looked like wine or juice deliberately dumped. "Miss Sullivan was still here when we arrived," the officer said. "She is currently being held on charges of criminal property damage. She was pretty incoherent, yelling about conspiracies and how she was going to make you pay for ruining her life." I walked through the townhouse in a daze. The destruction was so senseless, so angry. This was not just someone moving out in a hurry. This was deliberate vandalism. "There is more," Marcus said quietly, leading me to the bedroom that Brenda had been using as her HOA office. Papers were everywhere, scattered across the floor like confetti. But what caught my eye was the laptop sitting open on the desk, still powered on. The screen showed an email draft. I leaned closer to read it, and my blood ran cold. The email was addressed to someone named Gerald, and it detailed plans to make Daniel Lawson's life so miserable he will be forced to sell and leave the neighborhood. It talked about escalating harassment, coordinating with other residents to file complaints, and using her position as HOA president to issue constant fines and violations until I could not afford to stay. "That is premeditation," Marcus said softly. "She was planning this before the ice storm even happened. The garage thing was just an opportunity." I took pictures of the email with my phone, careful not to touch the laptop. "We need to show this to the police." The officer was very interested in the email. He photographed the laptop screen and added it to his report. "This changes things from simple property damage to potentially stalking and harassment. Combined with the protest and the prior police reports, we could be looking at serious charges." Over the next few days, the situation unfolded like a slow-motion car crash. Brenda was formally charged with felony criminal property damage because the destruction exceeded $5,000 in value. The prosecutor also added charges of harassment based on the documented threats and the organized protest. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but Brenda refused, insisting she was the victim and that I had somehow orchestrated everything. The story hit the news again. Channel 7 did a follow-up piece about the HOA president who destroyed her rental property after being removed from the board. The local media loved it. HOA horror stories always got attention, but this one had everything: abuse of power, property destruction, and a satisfying villain. I testified at a preliminary hearing, walking the judge through everything that had happened. The timeline of events, the threats, the protest, the destruction of property. Brenda sat in the courtroom looking smaller somehow, diminished without her title and her authority. Her lawyer tried to argue that Brenda had been under extreme stress, that the removal from the board had caused a mental health crisis. The prosecutor countered that Brenda's own emails showed premeditation and planning, that this was not a momentary breakdown but a calculated campaign of harassment. The judge ruled there was sufficient evidence to proceed to trial. While the criminal case moved forward, I had to deal with the civil side. The security deposit was nowhere near enough to cover the damage to the townhouse. I filed an insurance claim, but there would still be out-of-pocket expenses. My lawyer, a property attorney named Sarah Kim, helped me file a civil suit against Brenda for the damages not covered by insurance. "The good news is you have an incredibly well-documented case," Sarah said during one of our meetings. "The bad news is she probably does not have the money to pay even if you win. Most people do not realize you can win a judgment and never collect a dime. I know. I just want this done properly. Everything by the book." I was tired of the whole situation, but I was determined to see it through. The repairs to the townhouse took 3 weeks. I ended up hiring a contractor who specialized in restoration work, and we gutted most of the interior and started fresh. The final bill came to just over $12,000, which made me sick to my stomach. That was months of lost rent plus the repair costs. But while the townhouse was being repaired, something unexpected happened. The local media attention had made me something of a folk hero in certain circles. People who had dealt with abusive HOAs reached out to share their stories. A property rights advocacy group asked me to speak at their monthly meeting. I even got contacted by a documentary filmmaker who wanted to do a piece on HOA overreach. More immediately, the other residents of Riverside Meadows seemed to view me differently now. People who had participated in the protest came to apologize in person. My mailbox filled with cards thanking me for standing up to Brenda. The new HOA board, with Robert Martinez now serving as president, asked if I would be interested in joining as a member. I politely declined the board position. I had no interest in HOA politics, but I did agree to help draft new bylaws that would put clearer limits on board authority and create better accountability measures. If some good could come out of this mess, I wanted to make sure it did. Jim, my neighbor, came over one evening while I was working on the Mustang. The ice storm had been weeks ago now, and spring was starting to show signs of arriving. "You ever think about how crazy all of this was?" Jim asked, handing me a beer. "All the time. One minute, I am rebuilding a carburetor. The next I am on the news and my tenant is in jail." I accepted the beer and took a long drink. I still do not really understand how it escalated so fast. Brenda was a powder keg waiting to explode. You were just the spark. Jim leaned against my workbench. Sarah and I talked to some of the older residents, people who had been here since the development was built. They said Brenda started out okay, really involved and enthusiastic about community building. But over the years, she got more and more controlling. They think maybe it was because she did not have much else in her life. No family nearby, job was not great. HOA president was her identity. "That is sad, actually," I said, and I meant it. Despite everything, I could not help feeling a little sorry for her. She had destroyed her own life over a garage. The criminal trial happened in May. I had to testify again, this time in front of a jury. The prosecutor was thorough, walking through every email, every text message, every social media post. The video from the protest, recorded by multiple people, was played for the jury. The photos of the destroyed townhouse were shown on a large screen. Brenda's defense attorney tried to paint her as someone who had dedicated her life to her community and had a mental breakdown under stress. They brought in a psychologist who testified about how losing her position as HOA president could have triggered a dissociative episode. But the prosecution had the email I found on her laptop, the one detailing her plans to harass me into leaving. That email, more than anything else, showed this was not a sudden breakdown but a pattern of behavior. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Brenda cried when the verdict was read. Her lawyer put a hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged it off. When the judge asked if she had anything to say before sentencing, she stood up. "I gave everything to that community. Everything. And they turned on me the first chance they got, all because I tried to help people during an emergency." Her voice was bitter. Daniel Lawson could have opened his garage. He could have been a good neighbor. But he chose his property over people, and everyone is acting like he is a hero for it. The whole system is corrupt. The judge was not sympathetic. "Miss Sullivan, you abused a position of trust, harassed a resident, organized intimidation, and committed significant property damage. Your actions were not those of someone trying to help." They were the actions of someone who believed power gave them the right to override other people's rights. I am sentencing you to 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years probation. You will also be required to pay restitution for the property damage and complete anger management counseling. 18 months. It seemed like a lot for HOA drama, but when I thought about everything she had done, maybe it was appropriate. The civil case was settled out of court. Brenda's lawyer agreed to a judgment of $12,000 plus legal fees, with a payment plan that would probably take years to complete. Sarah was right. I would probably never see all the money, but having the judgment on record mattered. By the time summer rolled around, life had mostly returned to normal. The Mustang restoration was finished, a beautiful fastback in metallic blue that I drove to a car show in July. The townhouse was rented again, this time to a young couple who worked in tech and seemed wonderfully drama-free. The HOA board had implemented new bylaws that limited board authority and required member votes for any significant actions. I even started dating someone, a woman named Rachel who thought the whole HOA story was hilarious and called me her property rights activist boyfriend. She was not particularly interested in cars, but she appreciated good mechanical work, and that was close enough. One afternoon in August, I was in my garage when I got an unexpected visitor. Christine Porter, the HOA's lawyer, knocked on my door with an apologetic smile. "Mr. Lawson, I hope you do not mind me stopping by. I wanted to talk to you about something." She had a folder under her arm. "Sure, come in. What can I do for you?" I was wary but curious. I represent several HOAs in the Minneapolis area, and after everything that happened with Brenda Sullivan, a lot of my clients have been asking questions. They want to know how to prevent this kind of situation. Christine opened her folder. "I am putting together a training program for HOA boards about legal limits of authority, property rights, and proper procedures. I was hoping you would be willing to participate as a speaker, sharing your experience from the homeowner perspective." I almost said no automatically. I had done enough public speaking about this mess. But then I thought about all the messages I had gotten from other people dealing with abusive HOAs. Maybe sharing my story could actually help prevent someone else from going through the same thing. "What would it involve?" I asked. 2-hour sessions, probably once a month. You would talk about your experience, answer questions, help board members understand how their actions can impact residents. Christine looked hopeful. "I can pay you a consulting fee." This would be a professional engagement, not charity work. "Let me think about it," I said. "Can I give you an answer next week?" She agreed and left her contact information. After she was gone, I sat in my garage thinking about how strange life was. A few months ago, I just wanted to rebuild a car in peace. Now I was considering becoming some kind of HOA rights advocate. I talked it over with Rachel that evening over dinner at a Thai restaurant downtown. "You want to do it?" she asked, stealing a piece of my pad Thai. "I do not know. Part of me wants to just forget the whole thing happened, but part of me thinks maybe I have something useful to contribute." I pushed my plate toward her so she could steal more. "What do you think?" "I think you should do it. You are good at explaining things clearly without being preaky." And honestly, most HOA board members are just regular people who have no idea what they are doing. You could help them avoid becoming the next Brenda. Rachel grinned. "Plus, then I get to tell people my boyfriend is a professional consultant. That sounds fancy." So I called Christine the next day and agreed to participate in her training program. The first session was scheduled for September, and I spent a couple weeks preparing a presentation about property rights, documentation, and dealing with conflicts. The training was held at a community center in Edna. About 30 people attended, board members from various HOAs around the metro area. They were mostly middle-aged folks who looked tired and overwhelmed. I realized pretty quickly that most of them viewed their board service as an unpaid second job that no one appreciated. I shared my story, walking through the timeline of events. I showed them the actual bylaws and explained where Brenda had overstepped. I talked about the importance of following procedures and getting legal advice before taking action. During the Q&A session, one woman raised her hand. How do you balance being firm about rules while not becoming a tyrant? It was a good question. I think it starts with remembering that bylaws exist to serve the community, not to give the board power. Every action should be about making the neighborhood better, not proving you are in charge. And when someone pushes back or disagrees, that is not automatically them being a problem. Sometimes they have a legitimate point. Another man asked, "What should we do if we have a board member who is becoming like your HOA president was?" Document everything. Communicate with other board members, and do not be afraid to remove someone if necessary. That vote of no confidence saved my HOA from major legal liability. If they had waited longer, I probably would have sued. I pulled up a slide showing the potential costs of harassment lawsuits. It is cheaper and easier to remove a problem board member than to defend a lawsuit. The session went well. Several board members came up afterward to thank me and share their own stories of dealing with difficult situations. A few asked for my contact information in case they needed advice in the future. As I drove home that evening, I felt good about what I was doing. This was not how I had expected my year to go, but maybe it was better than just hiding in my garage. Life continued to settle into a new rhythm. The consulting work with Christine became a regular thing, usually 2 or 3 sessions a month with different HOA boards. I learned that most HOA drama came from simple miscommunication and people not understanding the legal framework they were working within. Actual tyrants like Brenda were rare, which was somehow reassuring. The Riverside Meadows HOA under Robert's leadership was remarkably boring in the best way possible. They maintained common areas, organized a summer block party, and sent out the occasional reminder about trash can placement. No threatening letters, no surprise fines, no demands to access private property. It was exactly what an HOA should be. I ran into Patricia Chen at the grocery store one day in October. She was the board member who had initially called to tell me about the fines. "Daniel, I owe you an apology," she said, catching me in the produce section. "I should have questioned Brenda when she told us about the emergency vote. I knew something felt off, but I just went along with it because she was so forceful. It is okay. She fooled a lot of people." I picked up a bag of apples, trying to figure out if they were ripe. "No, it is not okay. I have been on this board for 4 years, and I let her run roughshod over everything because it was easier than confronting her. You paid the price for my cowardice." Patricia looked genuinely upset. "I am doing better now. Robert and I have been working on making sure every board action is properly documented and voted on. No more one person making decisions." "That is good. That is really good." I meant it. The HOA was fixable because people like Patricia were willing to acknowledge mistakes and do better. We talked for a few more minutes before going our separate ways. As I finished my shopping, I thought about how many people had been affected by Brenda's behavior. It was not just me. It was every resident who had been intimidated into silence, every board member who had gone along with unreasonable demands because confrontation was uncomfortable, every neighbor who had participated in that protest without asking questions. The ripple effects of one person abusing power were enormous. In November, I got a letter from Brenda. It was forwarded through my lawyer, since Brenda was not allowed to contact me directly under the terms of her probation. Sarah called to let me know it was coming and to see if I even wanted to read it. "It is your choice," Sarah said. "You do not have to engage with anything she sends, but I read it, and it is not threatening. It is more of an apology letter, I think." I told her to send it, and it arrived 2 days later. I sat in my garage with the envelope for a while before opening it. Part of me did not want to read it, did not want to give Brenda any more space in my head, but curiosity won out. The letter was handwritten, 3 pages on yellow legal pad paper. Brenda's handwriting was surprisingly neat. "Dear Daniel, I have spent the last 6 months in prison thinking about what I did and why I did it. My therapist here says I need to take accountability for my actions, so that is what I am trying to do. You were right. About everything. I did not have the authority to demand your garage. I should not have issued those fines. I definitely should not have organized a protest at your home. And destroying your property was inexcusable. I let my anger and my need to be right override everything else, including common sense and human decency. I do not expect you to forgive me. I would not forgive me. But I wanted you to know that I understand now how badly I handled everything. I thought being HOA president meant I was responsible for fixing every problem, and when you would not let me fix things my way, I could not handle it. The truth is, I was scared. The ice storm was terrifying, and people were calling me asking for help, and I did not know what to do. Your garage seemed like a solution, something concrete I could point to and say, 'See, I am helping.' When you said no, it felt like you were saying I was useless. That does not excuse what I did. Nothing excuses it, but I want you to understand I was not trying to be evil. I was trying to matter, to prove I had value. I just did it in the worst possible way. I am going to be on probation for years. I will never hold an HOA position again. I have to list my felony conviction on every job application. My life is effectively over at 52 years old, and it is my own fault. I hope you are doing well. I hope your garage is still warm and your car restoration is finished. I hope you have friends and community and everything I threw away because I did not know how to be wrong. Sincerely, Brenda Sullivan." I read the letter 3 times, sitting in my garage with the Mustang parked beside me. It was strange reading an apology from someone who had caused so much chaos in my life. Part of me was still angry. Part of me felt sorry for her. Mostly, I just felt tired. I did not write back. Sarah advised against it, and honestly, I did not know what I would say. The letter was not really asking for anything, and I appreciated that. It was just Brenda trying to make sense of her own actions. I filed the letter away with all the other documents from the case. Maybe someday I would feel differently about it, but for now, I was content to let it be. December arrived with actual snow this time, not ice. Minneapolis looked like a Christmas card, all white and sparkly. Rachel and I went to a holiday market downtown, drinking overpriced hot chocolate and looking at handmade crafts. Life felt normal in a way it had not since before the ice storm. On Christmas Eve, the Riverside Meadows HOA organized a neighborhood light display contest. It was voluntary and fun, the kind of community activity that actually brought people together instead of dividing them. Rachel and I walked around the neighborhood looking at lights, and several people stopped to chat and wish us happy holidays. "This is nice," Rachel said, her hand warm in mine despite the cold. "This is what a neighborhood should feel like." "Yeah," I agreed. "It took some work to get here, but it was worth it." We walked past my house with its modest string of white lights around the garage door. Nothing fancy, but it looked welcoming. My garage, my property, my choice in how to present it. That simple freedom felt more valuable now than it ever had before. The legal aftermath finally concluded in January. Brenda's restitution payments started arriving, small amounts that Marcus deposited on my behalf. The criminal case was closed. The civil judgment was on the books. Everything was officially resolved. Christine asked me to speak at a state conference about HOA governance. I agreed, and ended up presenting to about 200 people about the importance of understanding legal limits and maintaining accountability. My story was used as a case study in what not to do. It was surreal, being on stage talking about the worst week of my life as a cautionary tale. But the feedback was positive. People approached me afterward sharing their own experiences, thanking me for speaking up, asking advice about their situations. I realized I had accidentally become an advocate, someone people turned to when they needed help navigating HOA disputes. It was not what I had planned for my life, but it felt meaningful in a way my day job as a software engineer did not always manage. By spring, a full year after the ice storm, I was in a routine. Work during the day, consulting for Christine in the evenings, weekends with Rachel, and working on cars. I had started a second restoration project, a 1972 Bronco that needed even more work than the Mustang had. The Riverside Meadows HOA was functioning smoothly. Robert Martinez was a fair and reasonable president. The board followed procedures. Residents attended meetings and participated in decisions. It was everything Brenda had claimed to want but had been unable to create because she could not share power. I sometimes wondered how things would have gone if I had just opened my garage that morning. If I had said yes instead of no, would everything have been different? Would Brenda still be HOA president? Would I still be an anonymous resident? Would life be simpler? Probably. But I also would not have learned how important it was to stand up for principles, even when it was uncomfortable. I would not have discovered that most people were reasonable when given accurate information. I would not have found a way to help other people avoid the same situation. So maybe it happened the way it needed to happen. On the anniversary of the ice storm, February 14th, which was also Valentine's Day, Rachel and I went out to dinner. Over dessert, she asked me if I regretted any of it. The whole HOA thing, fighting with Brenda. I thought about it while I ate my chocolate cake. I regret that it happened at all. I regret that someone felt so out of control they destroyed property and ended up in prison. But I do not regret standing my ground or speaking up. That part I would do again. Good, Rachel said, stealing a bite of my cake, because I like this version of you. The one who does not let bullies win. We toasted with our water glasses, and I looked around the restaurant at all the couples celebrating Valentine's Day. Normal people living normal lives, probably never thinking about HOA bylaws or property rights or the strange ways life can change direction in a single morning. The check came, and I paid with my credit card. As we walked out to my car, the Mustang which I had decided to keep as a daily driver after all that work, I felt content. The year had been chaotic and stressful and absolutely insane, but I had come out the other side intact. Better than intact, actually. Stronger, more confident, more connected to my community. Hey, Rachel said as we drove home through the snowy streets. Do you think you will ever buy another rental property in Riverside Meadows? I laughed. Absolutely not. I have learned my lesson about mixing investment properties and HOAs. From now on, I am buying rentals in the next county over. Wise man, she said, and we drove the rest of the way home in comfortable silence. My garage was warm when we got there, heated by the system I had installed and maintained and protected. The Bronco sat waiting for more work, and my tools hung organized on the walls. This was my space, earned and defended, and no one could take it from me. Brenda was somewhere serving her sentence, learning whatever lessons prison had to teach. The HOA was functioning the way it should have all along. The neighborhood was at peace, and I was exactly where I wanted to be, working on cars in my heated garage while life went on around me. It was not the story I had expected to live, but it was mine, and that was enough.